with the radical left. We never quit. We never surrender. Folks, from sea to shining sea and everybody in between, welcome, Patriots, on this glorious Friday. And thank God it's Friday. The week has flown by. I think we've got, like 10 days until the man himself, Donald J. Trump, is sworn back into the White House. And what will be his second term. Actually, he won 3 presidential elections in a row, but we're not going to go down the 2020 path tonight. But folks, 10 days until Donald J. Trump is the leader of the free world, and that is something to be very optimistic about. You know what else you all should be optimistic about? We've got the great Bryan Dean Wright on deck. It is Wright night on Friday. Bryan has been so awesome coming back on the show at least once a week now. And we've kind of settling into our routine here on Friday night with Wright night. You know, Bryan, gives his thoughts on news of the day, politics, culture. And then, of course, he's famous for our global intel assessment where he tells you about places you've likely never heard about and why they're important for you to hear about them. He's the smartest guy. We love having him around. So Bryan Dean Wright on deck. Also got to give a quick shout out to my friend, Dan Nunn, and his show, The Nunn Report. He rated the stream tonight. Thank you, my friend. If you're not already following The Nunn Report, and look at Patriot Raiders also rated the stream. Thank you both. But if you're not following The Nunn Report, you absolutely should. And you should also, why not go follow Patriot Raiders as well? Follow, subscribe, support like-minded patriots. That's just what we should do, right? Have overlapping fields of fire on every front, and that's how you set yourself up for success. Before we jump into the weeds of the show, and we have a big show today, make sure you smash that like button, that little gray button beneath the video, and it turns green when you actually do the smashing. That helps us make the leaderboard every day on Rumble. It looks like they weight the like buttons pretty heavily, so go ahead and smash that like button. Turn that like button green. Smash like Hulk, right? Hulk smash green. That's how I have it processing in my mind anyway. Okay, so biggest story outright is Trump sentenced in this fake trial with fake crimes and a fake judge and a fake, sloppy Alvin Bragg up there. Everything up there is completely fake. And this bastard in the black robe, Juan Merchan, who is absolutely positively a Democrat activist on the bench, is a disgrace to our American justice system, sentenced Donald Trump today with an unconditional discharge. That means essentially this: no jail time, no fine, no punishment other than being branded as a convicted felon. And battle crew, that is precisely the point, is it not? So it's just so frustrating. I mean, I heard Donald Trump talk about this directly to Juan Merchan, and the interesting thing is that almost nothing about this trial has been open to the public. It's just been open to the media, who then report on it to the public. But they specifically, Juan Merchan made the decision to make the sentencing public. And of course, they wanted the sound bites of him sentencing Donald Trump so that Democrats could use this in ads and use it to raise money for the midterms. All of this, is bad for our country, bad for our justice system, because obviously it is. But it's also a sick and perverse fundraising scheme for Democrats who are preparing right now for midterm elections. But I'm not going to play. I got 6 minutes of video here from Trump going after Juan Merchan to his face. It's newsworthy because Trump is going to be president in 10 days, and he's directing his comments to the judge about the overall process. And to me, it's like you have a local judge interfering with a presidential transition of power. It just never happened before in American history. And to me, it's just newsworthy. So check this out.
This has been a very terrible experience. I think it's been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system.
Agree.
This is a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. He thought it was from what I read and from what I hear, inappropriately handled before he got there. A gentleman from a law firm came in and acted as a district attorney.
Correct.
And that gentleman, from what I heard, was a criminal or almost criminal in what he did.
Correct.
It was very inappropriate. It was somebody involved with my political opponent.
Correct.
Part of the records that we're talking about, they're saying, I just noticed where he said I was falsifying business records. Well, the falsification of business records, as they said, was calling a legal expense in the books where everybody could see them, a legal expense. In other words, that legal fees or legal expense were put down as legal expense by accountants.
Correct.
They weren't put down by me. They were put down by accountants. I didn't call them construction, concrete work. I didn't call them electrical work. I didn't call them anything. They called a legal fee or a legal expense. And for this, I got indicted. It's incredible, actually. Now, if you look, my attorney alluded to it, the top legal scholars and legal pundits in this country, the ones that are quoted all the time on television, that are making their views felt and highly respected people, have said, virtually everyone that I know of, I haven't seen any to the contrary, not one, and these people are not exactly friends of mine, to put it mildly.
Correct.
But they all said this is a case that should have never been brought. It's an injustice of justice. Very respected Jonathan Turley, Andy McCarthy, Judge David Rifkin, a wonderful man who just passed away, by the way, Greg Jarrett, Ellie Honig from CNN, of all places. CNN said that. Paul Ingracian, Alan Dershowitz, they all said this is not a case that should be brought. It's
correct.
Now, think about it. Legal expenses are down as legal expenses.
I mean, look, again, 6 minutes, not going to play the whole thing, but this is a fake case with fake charges and a fake judge and a fake, very sloppy DA and Alvin Bragg. And Trump is right. There was somebody, number 3 at the Department of Justice, who left the Department of Justice to go work for a state prosecutor's office. Here's the thing with this, folks. Payback is going to be a bitch. I'm telling you that the Trump administration, the Trump Department of Justice, in 10 days, he's going to control the lever of power in this country. And he's going to be able to investigate. Indeed, I think he has a duty, not just President Trump, but the Department of Justice, to investigate what was going on with these state prosecutors like Fannie Willis and Alvin Bragg and others. I even think, Jack Smith, an investigation into him should be on the table too. How often were, Fannie Willis and Alvin Bragg, how often did they go to the White House? Was there text message, email communication between White House counsel, Biden administration officials, and these state level officials? If I'm a betting man, I just think that these people are probably going out of their way to delete a whole lot of things right now, because I can almost guarantee you, just using common sense, that there was quite a bit of communication between these state level folks and the Biden administration. You can bank on that. Okay, so we got Bryan Dean Wright on deck. We've got so much to talk about. But let me tell you first about My Patriot Supply, and then we'll get Bryan on, because he's just too smart to keep waiting in the wings. We're in crunch time right now. A new administration will be sworn in soon. But as great as that is, that also means our enemies have days left to stir up trouble. We talk about this basically every day on the show. This could mean a cyber attack. This could mean an invasion. God forbid, an attack on the homeland. So until longtime bureaucrats are out of Washington, I'm not taking any chances. That's why I have an emergency food supply from My Patriot Supply. Right now, they're offering $100 off their 3-month emergency food kit. It's got 2,000 calories per day for 3 whole months. Plenty to get you through even a prolonged emergency. All their food kits last up to 25 years in storage. Plus, they come in rugged, weatherproof buckets. So go to preparewithvnn.com right now to order your 3-month emergency food kit. I've got an emergency food supply in my home because my safety and security is worth it. It's also all about protecting the family. It's not about being paranoid. It's just about being prepared. So go to preparewithvnn.com to order your 3-month emergency food kit right this second. Okay. So without further ado, let me bring my buddy on, Bryan Dean Wright. He's the host of the Wright Report Daily podcast, former CIA operations officer. Bryan, we got so much to talk about, man, but first of all, welcome. Looking dapper as usual.
I got to bring the A game. Come on, America's sweetheart, Sean Parnell. I got to show up looking sharp.
Do you just roll out of bed wearing a suit? That's the first question.
I do. Former CIA guys, we got to be ready at all times. You know, we have the fast cars, the pretty girls. Dude. We got to be ready. We got to be ready.
Do you do okay? So we've got to talk about the spy game here. Yeah. Do you drink martinis? Do you have a monocle?
Right, shaken, not stirred, the whole thing.
You know who I'm named after, right? My mom had a thing for Sean Connery, the very first James Bond. And my dad's like, there's no way I'm naming my first son Sean after James Bond, Sean Connery. So my first name is Richard. My middle name is Sean. Here I am, named after a famous spy, though.
Well, you're carrying on the legacy. I see it. You got the hair, the smile. Your mom's got to be proud. Well done, Mom. I'm sorry, Dad.
Okay, so give me a sense of what you're thinking with this Trump trial in New York. Bryan, it's just unbelievable that something like this could happen in America, and it's really indicative of just how the Democrats operate on everything with regards to everything. Everything they touch is either corrupted or slowly decays. In this case, the justice system. Here you have a judge supposed to be fair and impartial, clearly a Democrat operative. His daughter is raking in millions of dollars fundraising for Democrats who are elected officials in office right now. So this family is enriching themselves off of this trial. Mershon is completely ignoring the Supreme Court ruling on immunity. I mean, there was all sorts of evidence in this case that was introduced during President Trump's time in office during his first term that clearly falls under presidential immunity. I mean, that's grounds for a mistrial. Doesn't delay the sentencing, but basically gives him no jail time at all. They just want the moniker of convicted felon for fundraising purposes and prepping for the midterm and information operations. What is your take on all this craziness?
You said it all. I have nothing else to add. Oh, this is very awkward, very embarrassing. No, you're look, you're right. So here's what I would offer. If we were to sit back and take what you just said, and if, let's say, we are intel officers and we are in Zambia or Malawi, if we are in Bangladesh, and we're looking at a political system and a country that has those sets of facts and data, along with some analysis and opinion that you've just offered, what would we think about that? Well, we would say that there's clearly cases of corruption, that this government and its judicial system are not free and fair. That's what a reasonable person, a reasonable intel officer would think operating abroad. So I would offer that as a reflection, if to really step back and think about the magnitude of the moment. Our intel officers abroad, that's how they would look at this information. That's how we should too. It demonstrates that there is a lot of corruption in this country, and there's a lot of corruption up in New York. We even have Governor Cuomo, former governor of that state, a Democrat, saying that this case would not have been brought had Trump's last name not been Trump. So we have all the intel we need to get to the point that you have in offering that analysis and opinion. The facts are very clear. And so what is my reflection ultimately is, as you just said, the slogan that the Democrat Party will now use, that Trump is a convicted felon, it's kind of like they needed that comfort therapy dog, that you see on planes. People, they're not blind. They just want a dog on the plane with them.
That drives me. Right? That does drive me crazy. Yeah. Bryan, one time I was next to a dog that was basically like a mini pony. Right. Like, come on, man.
So that's what this is for the Democrat Party. This is their little pony, okay? They need a little pony to snuggle up with to make them feel good for the next 4 years. They got to point to something. Here's the problem politically, and I offer this as a guy who was a Democrat for 20 years. If you focus on that, which is absurd, which is lawless, but if you focus on that as a party, and that's what you continue to repeat, you are going to lose elections because people are going to say you're crazy, because you are. So this is the problem for the Democrat Party, because they are run by political pundits on MSNBC and New York Times and the rest. These people are caught in hysteria and panic. This started back in 2016 with the Trump-Russia hysteria. That panic and that hysteria has not broken. So we see this continued, whether it be the judge and his family on cable news, etc. They're caught in this panic and hysteria. It's kind of like the Salem witch trials, they can't break that hysteria. So that is politically, they are in for a very long ride if they're going to continue to stick with it. And that's fine at some level. We might laugh at them and mock them. But the problem is a lot of people in this country live under their policies. And actually, it connects them to the California fires, come to think of it. Because the craziness out there affects all of us through things like insurance rates across the country. So this stuff does have an impact. You might not at first expect it or anticipate it, but it does. The hysteria of the left destroys the nation, all of us, no matter where we live.
It is the truth. I mean, check out this. I saw this right before we went live, and I immediately grabbed the video because I wanted to get your reaction to it. There's so much. This is a perfect segue to, everything the left touches dies. Everything that the left is in charge of becomes a dismal failure. And in a time of crisis, that could be dangerous and even cost people their lives. And tragically, we are seeing that play out right now in California. And Bryan, I did a show last year around this time of year. It's like same damn stuff in Maui. Same damn problems, same problems with first responders, same overt focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, not getting the best qualified people in positions, especially when first responders, when lives are on the line. Same problems with water. Obviously, Hawaii Island surrounded by water. They ran out of water during those wildfires. California, Pacific Ocean is right there. No water in the hydrants. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, Bryan, and I'm barely scratching the surface, and we'll delve deeper into this with you. But look at this video. So just a microcosm of all things Democrat in this video is Biden from the Oval sitting behind the Resolute desk on a Zoom call with Gavin Newsom talking about the fire hydrant thing. It just pisses me off to no end how these people just take zero accountability for anything ever, period. They become the victim, they point the finger, they accuse, but they never take accountability, which is leadership 101. But just listen to this, and I want to get your reaction.
Roll it. Let's do it.
The other thing is, look, I think you're getting a bad rap. I know you're getting a bad rap about these fire hydrants don't have enough water in them. Give me a break. Give me a break. What this is all about is the utilities, understandably, what they did is they cut off power because they're worried about these high tension lines coming down and causing more fires in the wind, right? When they do that, guess what? They shut off the power that controls the ability to pump the water. And so now you're getting generators here. I mean,
I'm sorry, but this is
he's wrong.
Go.
Can we just start with the facts? He's wrong. The Wall Street Journal, in fact, the LA Times ran a piece that, in fact, they didn't shut off the power. They specifically did not do that. That is one of the things that other utilities in California, they do in places in the mountainous, like in the Sierras. They will shut off electricity so they don't spark the fires. LA did not do that in this case. So he's just wrong on the facts. Let's just start that. We don't have an issue of a pump house lack of electricity problem. What we've got are a number of other things. First, the reservoirs above the Palisades, at least one was empty.
There you go, right there.
One was empty. The LA Times has reported on that today. Why was it empty? It's been empty for over a month. Why would you have it empty knowing that the Santa Anas come every time this time of year and always spark fires, always? Second, we know that this part of Southern California is semi-arid. So why would you leave a reservoir that will then feed your critical fire infrastructure? Why would you leave that empty? That is absolutely a potential failure of leadership. We should be asking questions about that for Biden to sweep it away. I'm sorry, he needs to get different dementia meds because they're not working today. They're just not. So he's wrong in the facts. He's wrong in the logic. And there are a lot of really good and important things that we need to talk about it and learn, like the fact that are there enough water tanks or reservoirs further up these hills of the Palisades? Because we know that the firefighters, part of the reason why the fire hydrants weren't pumping out is because those guys were tapping into the trunk line that was feeding these big tanks up higher up in the Palisades. That because they were fighting the fires down below. So that's why we ran out of water and then the fire hydrants went dry. So that is very much appropriate to talk about and debate and to understand why the hell was that reservoir empty. A lot of good, important questions that have to be asked and answered. Joe Biden ain't going to be part of it when he brings up false things. things like this electricity stuff. What an idiot. God.
I mean, See, now you're starting to see. I think I might be rubbing off on you a little bit here, Bryan, because this I'm the name calling, that's normally reserved for me. Let's just be honest. You normally don't cross that red line.
These are the times that try men's souls.
Well played. Well played. Did you hear the stuff about the emergency management? I got this video. I got so many videos of this. There's just like so much incompetence all at the same time during this wildfire. It's almost incomprehensible to me. I mean, it took forever to even get the National Guard out there to stop. I mean, we'll get into that in a second, but they totally lost control of their own emergency management system. Watch this. Listen to this.
Well, in coordination with our federal and state partners, how we can stop the messages that are going out right now that are not being initiated by a human action, to stop that and then understand how that occurred so that the tool can still be used for what was identified as like a critical fire weather that we're still in experiencing and will continue to experience.
I don't even know what the hell he said. I'm sorry.
I know that those are words in English, but I think that the way he has assembled those words have left me confused. I'm not sure what any of those words meant together.
It's what's so frustrating is that this is just unbelievable and would be hysterical incompetence if it weren't so tragic. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Wait a minute. This is in California. He's talking Kamala. That's what that was. She speaks in gibberish. She speaks like a gypsy. Like, I think there's something happening. We need to intervene in California, clearly.
I mean,
it's so absurd. And people are dying. That's really the point. We can laugh and joke about this, but at the end of the day, people are dying. I'm sure you have seen some of the footage where journalists or reporters are going out to the Palisades and other places. They're showing burnt out homes and they accidentally capture skeletons in the ashes. This is serious. This is horrific. It is not a joke. This disastrous leadership, right or left, it kills people. Right. And right now in California, there is only one party to look at. From LA County, the city itself, the state, it is led by one party. So the finger gets pointed in that direction when we ask about leadership failures, and that is fair.
Yeah, I think so too. And you have all these Democrats in the media said, oh, they're trying to blame Trump, which is not surprising, but also it's just old, it's tired, it's ridiculous. The guy's not in power yet. And it's all the people that don't want to politicize this are also the people who caused it. Isn't that funny how that works? You're absolutely right in your analysis in that California has been under uniparty Democrat rule for decades. And every one of their irresponsible policies have inextricably led to this moment. And it's just unbelievable to me. And the crazy thing about it is, segueing to almost a national security and what an asymmetric threat is, that our enemies, they know the Democrat policies. They know that in a state like California, there's absolutely no forest management. And because there's no forest management, there's a particular vulnerability there for forest fires when combined with high winds and everything else. And then, of course, if Democrats have been in charge for decades, which they have, that there's a high likelihood of them not being ready, them not being prepared, an overt focus on DEI, whatever. And so you see some news that's coming out today, 10 crews of cartel organized looters tactically going from house to house on the Hollywood Hills. They've got spotters. They've got SUVs full of young men with masks. They've got burner rental cars. It's like one big coordinated military operation. And again, I haven't seen, the National Guard, I guess, is mobilized out there now, but it took way too long. Is this something that our enemies could target in an asymmetric way, or are they doing it now?
Well, they're already doing it. So one of the things that we know is that the South American crime rings have been operating throughout this country for many, many years, going back to 2014. You and I talked about this a number of weeks or maybe even months ago now, that during the Barack Obama era, he joined this entity that allows people to travel to this country without a visa. So we know that there have been different countries, the citizens of those countries have traveled here as crime rings, breaking into all kinds of homes. We saw that some NFL and NBA folks who got hit back in December and November because of these crime
Right.
rings.
That's right.
They were operating in LA County, Orange County. They operate in Texas and Oklahoma City. They operated in Long Island, in Connecticut. They are everywhere. So we would expect that when you have a vacuum of power and authority, law enforcement, they're going to fill that void. Of course they will. That's what thugs do. So we would not be surprised that these people would then flood in. But the thing is, they flood in because there's no, well, first of all, because we have failed and we have allowed them in. Second, they continue to do what they do because they don't fear consequences. And that's all about district attorneys. That's all about people that out in California, who they are voting into office, about who to arrest and who to charge and who to put into prison. That is why they do what they do. So that is fundamentally, if there are looting problems and challenges, it's because the law enforcement community, specifically the DAs out in California, don't prosecute, don't put people into jail. There is no deterrent. So it's not shocking. Humans are like bears, right? If we're hungry, we can go to the trash bin and eat, or we have to hunt. Well, what's easier? Well, I got to go to the trash bin. Humans are no different. All right. If we don't have to work, most of us won't. We'll just go rip stuff off. And that's what we're seeing in these South American crime rings all around this country. So there is no shock or surprise that they would be involved in looting in the hours and minutes after homes are burning down and skeletons are in the ashes. They don't care because they're not Americans and they're just vile, evil humans. That's why you have law enforcement and good DAs. Californians learning that lesson today.
You know, there was a story that broke last year sometime about how illegal aliens in Florida, you know, they were gangs, as you articulated. It would travel from Florida up to New York just to commit crimes, steal money, steal things from stores, knowing that if they got caught, they'd be let right back out. And then they'd travel back to Florida and live La Vida Loca on the beach somewhere, knowing that up in New York, they were never going to get arrested. So you see very clearly how these they did completely prey on people in these liberal areas.
Here's the key part to your story. When asked why they didn't commit those same crimes in Florida, it's because they said they were worried about Governor DeSantis and getting cracked down by the DAs who actually prosecute these crimes. That's the critical part of what you just said, which is a deterrent. They go to New York because of the Soros DAs that don't prosecute. This isn't rocket science. And this, at the end of the day, this is so important. This is not about Republicans or Democrats. This isn't about being conservative or a liberal. This is about having common sense. This is about understanding the human condition. This is about just applying basic decency to your laws. That is the failure. We oftentimes put this into a political lens. That ain't right. It's just common sense. Unfortunately, it's not common. But your great example is such a wonderful one about this Florida versus New York stuff. It's such a great example.
Well, I mean, you're 100% right. It's just common sense. I honestly cannot believe that you and I have to sit here and even have these conversations. And, you know, I mean, look, we're talking about cartels or gangs capitalizing on a very terrible situation who are already here, obviously because of the catastrophic Biden open border over the last 3.5 years. But now a Los Angeles County official stated that there have been nearly 300 fires set intentionally by acts of arson or terrorism. So if you're a terrorist who crossed through our open border, someone who would do this country harm, maybe you don't want your country of origin blamed, but you want to do a lot of damage. You're going to go to California where they have poor forest management, where they're not focused on any of this stuff. They're clearly not ready for it at all. And you could probably do a lot of damage by starting a wildfire. You know, I mean, like I just
look, whether you're an arsonist or you're a terrorist, the point is bad people will do bad things. So what kind of county and city and state leadership and federal leadership do you have that's going to smoke these people out and find them and eject them from the country or put them in prison? Right? That should be the focus. Instead, what we've got for the past 4 years or beyond in places like California are people who believe in what's called restorative justice, where it actually asks people who are the individuals who have suffered from crime, the victims of crime. Restorative justice, you can go on Biden's DOJ website right now. Restorative justice asks the victims to imagine the times when they've committed a crime or they've done something wrong. in order to create compassion and sympathy for the criminal, right, who just assaulted them or raped them or tried to murder a family member. That's at the heart of restorative justice. So that's what's going on in LA County, California, across this country right now under the Biden DOJ. It's why, by the way, Laken Riley's killer was not, potentially put into the electric chair. It's the same stuff. You don't have consequences, you're going to get terrible behavior. This isn't a shocker. And by the way, the South American crime rings in LA, they don't use guns oftentimes. Why? Because they know that will automatically up the charges potentially. So they do whatever they do so they don't use guns, and they either get deported or they get released from prison or jail immediately and they fly back home. So it's all a scam. It's a leftist scam that's destroying the country, and it is destroying so many communities out there. And we need to be honest about it. We need to talk about it because a lot of people are living in a nightmare that they shouldn't.
It just really feels like President Trump is going to have his work cut out for him on a lot of different fronts in 10 days. I mean, it just,
let me say, this president, based on all my years of work and the people that trained me, I will tell you with absolute certainty that no president has faced as many domestic and foreign threats as Donald Trump will in just a number of days' time. And I'm talking about even during the Soviet era. Truly, the number of threats that man faces and his team, even if you don't like the guy, pray for him. Pray for that team if you're a praying person, because we really have a magnitude of threats that we face. And it's a scary time, but I think with new leadership, we can tackle it. It's like eating an elephant, man, one bite at a time. We're going to have to go very slow, but we'll get through it. It's just going to be really, really hard to turn this ship around.
I mean, you think the number one threat that we face, I mean, you bring up really interesting points. I mean, what's the most urgent? Obviously, we talk about the border all the time, but are there other obvious threats that jump out at you that this country is particularly vulnerable from?
Well, the number one is China. Absolutely, unquestionably. They are more dangerous and a graver threat than the Soviets ever were, hands down. Part of the reason, as we talk about terrorism, we talk about the potential of lighting fires. One of the things that we know is the Chinese are so deeply embedded in us. If you do a little bit of internet research, I talk about this on the podcast, but groups called Assault Typhoon and Volt Typhoon, there's a Flax Typhoon. The point is they've got these cyber actors that can infiltrate everything and have. Right now, our cell phone systems in this country are hacked by China and we can't get them out. So if you're sending a text, that's not encrypted. They're usually grabbing all of it, right?
Yeah,
so,
I mean, you saw this Wall Street Journal article. I assume that's what
right.
you're referring to. My neighbor, who's a great American patriot, sent it to me, said how Chinese hackers graduated from clumsy corporate thieves to military weapons.
That's right.
Typhoon cyber attacks on U.S. infrastructure and telecoms sought to lay the groundwork for potential conflict with Beijing.
So remember, not only do we have these cyber actors, but we have a record number of Chinese nationals coming across the border over the past 4 years. Many of them are likely, we'd imagine, coming for jobs. They are trying to get away from President Xi, who's a dictator, fine. But even if 1 or 2 or 5% are Chinese saboteurs, or the Chinese government goes to them and says, hey, look, we know your family's back in China. We're going to throw them in jail. We're going to torture them. Or you will start a brush fire in LA. You're going to do it. You will be an arsonist, or we're going to slaughter your family. Make the call. That kind of intel work should be going on in the FBI and the CIA right now to find these people and get them the hell out of this country. Because it's not that they're bad people. Some of them might be. Some of them might be paid saboteurs. But some of them are vulnerable to foreign governments telling them, you will act on our behalf or we're going to do bad things to you. That's why the open borders threat was such a disaster. 9 million people unvetted. That's why it matters. That's why good presidents matter. That's why good governors matter. That's why good DAs matter. That's the stuff we got to fix. And that's why there are so many threats that Trump and so many others are going to have to deal with. And why, by the way, your local races really matter for mayors and DAs and your state senators and your governors. So much power there. And that's all got to be changed too. So we got a big set of problems. We can fix it, but we got a lot of problems.
I mean, look, man, you talk about local races. In October of 2019, 2 months before the COVID pandemic really broke out. Now, COVID was here before December of 2019 and January of 2020, but a high-ranking CCP diplomatic official came to Western Pennsylvania, to Pittsburgh, and met with a county executive, a Democrat county executive in the city of Pittsburgh, And all of a sudden, Pittsburgh's a sister city with Wuhan 3 months before this virus comes from a lab in Wuhan. But my point is this: these Chinese CCP officials, I mean, there is no diplomatic purpose for a high-ranking CCP official to meet with a county executive, but they put the work in. They put the work in, and they target these local officials. And whether I'm not suggesting that this anything's possible, but I'm not suggesting this guy was working with the Chinese. I'm just simply saying China reaches out to local officials. That's a no bullshit assessment. They do it, and they do it very well.
Last month, a city council member out in California, I believe it was Alameda City, she and her husband was arrested for being a Chinese spy. They go after city council members, the Chinese do, in places, and especially California. We've known this for years. The FBI has talked about it publicly. Axios News did a really great investigative piece back in 2020 highlighting that city officials, state representatives, one at the time was named Representative Eric Swalwell. He went on, of course, to be a national representative. California is a beachhead for communist China. The cases are clear. The evidence is overwhelming. It wasn't just Fang, bang, banging Eric Swalwell. There are lots of other California politicians, and it's largely on the left, but not exclusively. And they are very, very good because they are trying to destroy this country. That is China's goal. Absolutely, unquestionably. So again, I can't say what did or didn't start the fires in the last number of days, but I can tell you that the conditions, certainly Santa Ana winds and the dryness and the lack of humidity, those were ultimately the things that fueled it. What's the spark? At this point, we don't know, but it is in the realm of possible that we could have either a terrorist and a domestic arsonist, or a guy like connected to the CCP, either as a saboteur or somebody who was forced. All of that is now an open question. I don't know what the answer is. But if it's not today and it's not this fire, the threat could be tomorrow and the coming days. And that's the whole point of why an open borders for 4 years was not just wrong or a policy difference, but it was treasonous. Joe Biden and his party committed treason over 4 years. That son of a bitch, pardon my language, needs to be in prison. The people who facilitated the invasion of this country of 9+ million, those were acts of treason. There is no other way to view it.
Damn, Bryan. I mean, I heard you say this on the podcast, on the Wright Report Daily Podcast, which if you're not subscribed to that, folks, what are you waiting for? It's your own personal presidential daily brief. You should definitely go subscribe to Bryan's podcast. But I thought to myself, damn, Bryan Dean Wright dropping the treason bombs. That's not something that you normally do. So it must be pretty damn bad if you're doing it.
It's an important word. It's an important idea, and you don't want to just toss it around. But, look, if the shoe fits, right? And I think that's pretty evident. Joe Biden had the presidential authorities to seal up that border. He lied. He said he didn't. He tried to get new laws. That failed in the Senate. And then when that law, that border laws, we all recall when it failed in the Senate last June, he used the presidential authorities he's long known that he has had to start to seal up the border. So he lied for 4 years or 3.5 years saying he didn't have the authority. Then he used them in June. Of course, he and his team knew that they have the authority to lock down the border. It was a choice not to. That is an act of treason. When you have 9 million plus people in this country that shouldn't be here and you didn't vet them, that's treasonous. Everything that flows from that are acts of treason. All that criminality, whether it be crime, whether it be Lake and Riley murdered, whether it be saboteurs and fires, whatever it is, all of that stems from an act of treason for not doing the one job that the president of the United States has, which is to defend our borders. We have 50 governors. They can solve lots of problems. The federal government is responsible for the borders. You fail on that and you do it intentionally when you have the powers, then you are a traitor. That is the bottom line, and that's what the facts show very, very clearly.
Wow, man, I couldn't agree with you more.
Okay. Now I need a drink. I'm fired
up. Well, it's Friday, right? It's Friday.
Oh.
So, hell, you can have one on the show. We're laid back around here. You don't have to wear the suit, Bryan.
Let's do it. I'm going to start bringing whiskey.
Oh, I have a question for you as you were speaking,
Yes.
And I thought about it. Okay, so how do these Chinese spies or assets here in America approach these local officials or members of Congress in Washington? And what do they get on them to actually use them to control, to leverage? I mean, how does, give the listeners and the viewers a sense, if you can, to the extent that you can, a sense of how that works. How do they even approach people? They just do it cold. And if you're a politician and you've got somebody, I'm just saying, you'd think you'd be immediately suspicious, right? I feel like you don't have to be a genius unless there's some way that I'm just not aware of.
All right. So the best way to think of this, in other words, how do I go from, as Bryan the spy, and I just meet Sean for the first time, how do I move him from loving America to committing treason against America? What's that process like? Yeah.
And if you're from China, I'm sorry, but isn't that a little bit like of a red flag? No pun intended.
Well, it should be, shouldn't it? So that should be, from your perspective, that should be one of the first things you ask, which is, why does this person want to be my friend? Let's put this into a little bit of a different context. Let's say that you see a pretty girl and you're single and you want to ask her out. So what do? You do what in the intel world we would call target analysis. You would figure out everything you can about that pretty girl. You'd figure out what makes her tick, what she likes, what she doesn't like, and you'd figure out your approach. So you figure that she likes puppies. Well, you just went to the pound and picked up a puppy. All right. You walk into the bar, you see the gal that you always see on Friday at 10 o'clock. So that's part of the target analysis. You figure out where they're at. You approach them with something that you know that they're likely going to want. In the political world, what do politicians want? Money, money. So a lot of these Chinese politicians or these Chinese spies will approach as businessmen, as, you know, they got deep pockets, and they will let that politician know they've got deep pockets. So now suddenly you're showing value, much like if you were to go to that bar or show that pretty girl, you're going to show her the puppy, the same thing. You're pulling at a motivation. There's also something else called you're pulling at a vulnerability. This is where the Chinese, as they hack our phones and they get access to our texts and our emails and the rest of it, now through that collection of intel called SIGINT or signals intelligence, or humans can give me information about Sean. I can go to Sean and I can say, Sean, I know what you've been using your computer for. Naughty boy. So here's the deal, Sean. I know
Chinese spies do this.
Absolutely. It's blackmail. You pitch to a vulnerability. So I would say, Sean, I know that you are doing the following naughty things. I also know you're very close to Donald Trump. So here's what you're going to do for me. You're going to give me physical access to Mr. Trump or his family, and I'm going to kidnap Dom Jr. I'm going to kidnap, one of his kids. I'm going to do whatever. You were going to do that, or I'm going to expose this very terrible, bad thing about you. And now you have a moral choice. You can either say, screw you, I'm not going to do it, and then they release the bad thing about you, or you do it and you take the coin and you cooperate, not because you really want to, because you feel like you have to. So there are different approaches then that you can use as an intel officer. If I got bad derogatory information on you, I can pitch you to become my spy using blackmail or other things like that. Or I can take that softer approach. I can move, work on your motivations. I know that, let's say, you're that pretty girl at the bar again, I'm taking the puppy to try, and then we create a softer bond. And you want to know more about me because I'm interesting. And I've learned more about you because I've done all this targeting work. And I know you love a certain kind of coffee. So I say, hey, I don't know, are you a coffee drinker? Maybe we should have a cup of coffee sometime. And you're like, oh my God, I love coffee. How did you know that? Let's go. So that's part of the targeting work that you do beforehand. And then you just build a relationship and you pull that person along and you start slowly interjecting ideas of like, your country's in a lot of problems right now, Sean. Gosh, Trump he's doing a lot, but a lot of bad stuff is happening. If only there were a way you could help, Sean. If only there were a way that you could do something to solve the problem, Sean. I'm going to give you that way. I work for the Brits, the Israelis. I'm going to give you $100,000 a month because you have physical access to Trump. Here's what we're going to do together to make America strong. You're going to work with me. So the pitch comes in different formats, but you approach the individual through a vulnerability or a motivation. That's more or less how those relationships begin. So guys like Eric Swalwell, perfect case example, he's approached by a pretty girl. So he's not thinking with his head. Second, she's bringing cash that he wants. And, so there you go. That's how the Chinese approached him.
Well, these moral choices, aren't sometimes these stories fake too? I mean, could that be a thing? Like, because what if you don't have anything? I mean, how do they get access to your, it says all this is just, I'm a knuckle dragging infantryman. So
let's talk about it. No, we love everybody. So let's talk about this. So over the past couple of weeks and past couple of months, you may have heard or seen other podcasts or other people out there using their background as CIA officers or special forces people say things like,
Yeah, good.
hey,
It's a good
there are
segue.
1,000 Al-Qaeda members inside of this country. That seems really scary. And the CIA person will say for sure that that's true. So these are people who will come to the table, like let's say I'm an intel officer and Sean comes to me and says, hey, I've got this great piece of information, this intel, 1,000 Al-Qaeda members are here. Even though I know that Sean is a wonderful patriot and he's an incredible man, I still have to vet him and I have to vet his information. So I'm going to assume that the threat could be real.
Yeah. So
And
talk
I'm gonna-
about this, the volunteers, right? Give me a
Yes.
sense. Like you said, we were talking about text message. The CIA has these things called volunteers, and there was a motto like "Don't f up the money, the guns, or the volunteers." Explain, because I was like, "What's a volunteer?" Explain to the
Yeah.
audience what is a volunteer.
Okay. So again, if somebody comes to me, Brian's a CIA officer and I'm out in the world, and somebody comes to me and says, hey, look, I know you work for whatever U.S. government agency. I have some very important information that needs to go to the CIA, to the State Department, to President whomever. And I say, great, I'm trained to talk to you. I'm now going to vet your information and I'm going to vet you. I can't go into public details about exactly how that transpires, but I will say this. You would almost imagine it's like an investigative journalist. I'm going to say who, what, when, where, why, and how. So I'm going to ask you about the information. Tell me more about the threat. Who told you the threat? When's it going to happen? How many operatives? What date? What time? What kind of explosives? What kind of guns? How are they traveling? What kind of vehicle? What kind of plane? When did they get here? Where are they staying right now? All those kinds of questions. We're going to dive into the threat. And then I'm going to say, tell me more about you, friend. Who are you? Where did you come from? How did you get this information? I want to know more about you as a person. So that is how you would vet a volunteer. And what I would say is it's very, very difficult as a spy or as a journalist when you get a tip to vet both the people and the information. That's why you got to have different kinds of source of information. People, seized emails, phone calls. You got to really vet the people and the information. So unfortunately, a lot of podcasts and a lot of people in media, just generally, they will deal in a business of these volunteers, of these sources, sometimes anonymous. You got to do a lot of work to make sure you know who the person is that sits in front of you and their information. A lot of vetting has to go into that. But a lot of podcasters, a lot of people in media, they're not really incentivized to do that, are they, to vet? Because the more scandalous, the more outrageous, the more scary, the more likely it is that people out there in a world that's very scary, that you and I have talked about so many times over the past 6-9 months, in that scary world, if you hear somebody who's saying, I have critical information to keep your family safe, and I'm a former CIA guy, so listen to me for sure, boy, I'm going to listen to you. And that's what some of these people are doing. They're not vetting their volunteers. They're not vetting their sources properly. They're putting out fragmentary, unvetted, uncorroborated information, and they're scaring the crap out of people. So that's one of the great criticisms I have of journalism generally, but also a lot of podcasters right now. They're just spreading a bunch of baloney that's not true or that's unvetted. Could be true. You got to take it seriously. As an intel guy, if somebody came to me and said, I have a threat information, I'm taking that seriously. I have to. I'm trained to make sure, because the second that I don't is the second that somebody dies because I didn't take that information seriously. And I will say one last thing. In the world of intel, the volunteers, 99% of them, trash, garbage. But that 1%, friend, that 1%, it may change the world. There's an old Soviet guy that we used to work with, Oleg Penkovsky. He changed the world because he was a volunteer. And he said, CIA, US government, I have information that could help protect this world and your country, to help bring down the Soviet Union. Those kinds of volunteers are rare. They happen once every generation, but you got to take them seriously, especially when it comes to Al-Qaeda or terrorism threats. So very important to take those volunteers seriously.
God, I'm so fascinated by this stuff. I'm so fascinated by the, cloak and dagger spy game stuff. It's just not a world that I've ever really had to deal with. I mean, obviously my world has always been kinetic, close with, destroy the enemy. That's it, Okay, shift gears. Come with me to Mexico, my friend.
Do we have to?
And the
I'm gonna need tequila instead of water.
Mexico's commie leader talking about No fentanyl production.
Okay. So this is crazy. It is well established that all kinds of drugs come out of Mexico. Why? Because the cartels make a bunch of money through that process, obviously. Well, it's actually not so obvious because President Sheinbaum this week insisted that the cartels do not produce fentanyl in her country. That is a lie. So we know that the cartels not only cook it, but they go to their universities, Mexican universities, and they poach chemistry students to cook in their labs. We also know that when they cook their drugs to include fentanyl, they go to the homeless populations in Mexico and they inject the homeless people. They give them about $30 to try this hit. And if they live, then the homeless person gives feedback about the hit.
What?
So we know that this happens.
This is a thing for real?
For real. Yeah, I was back to, I mean, it's been reported for years, but last month, the New York Times did a great expose on it. But there's classified information that confirms all this. The point is, President Sheinbaum knows that she's full of crap, and she's lying about this. The problem is, why? Why is she lying about something that's so obvious? It would like be looking at the sun and saying, there's no sun there. It would be like looking at Joe Biden and saying, oh, yeah, his mind totally works. It's completely normal, right? It's the same principle. It's so obviously a lie. Why would she do that? Well, best case scenario, she has some pride in Mexico and she's just trying to fib her way through it. But the worst case scenario is this is what the cartels want her to say, that it's a cartel talking point. And we have seen Mexican leadership from the presidency down to their Ministry of Defense, their Ministry of Interior, their equivalent of the CIA and FBI. They have been on the cartel payrolls for many, many years. So what does that suggest about Claudia Sheinbaum? Is she compromised? Maybe. We know she's a Marxist. That's established. But is she controlled by the cartels? Donald Trump said earlier this week that he knows or believes that the Mexican government is controlled by the cartels. He's right. So what does that mean for our border? How do we then engage with this country? Huge implications. So that's why this statement this week by Sheinbaum really matters to all of us.
Bryan, Trump has made it very clear that in 10 days' time, he's going to get very aggressive with the cartels. And I think he should. He should. I think he should. We're on our southern border. We wouldn't tolerate a sophisticated terror group this close to mainland America. I mean, it's just like absolutely ridiculous that they've gone on this long unchecked. But they're going to fight back. Do they stand a chance? Many of them are already here. I mean, I'm sure that they could do I'm sure they could do damage here, right? I mean, these people are well armed. They've got surface to air missiles. I mean, they in many cases they've got their own sophisticated paramilitary operations going on. Drones.
Yeah.
So they're going to fight back, right?
Yep. They sure will. Look, they have a multi-billion-dollar business. They're not just going to roll over and say, we're just going to sell avocados and tacos. So let's just start there. Well, what we have seen in El Salvador is President Bukele down there went from the most dangerous country in the northern and southern Americas to the safest, most dangerous to the safest. How did he do it? He arrested a shock and awe campaign of cartel and gang members, and he did it within a number of weeks to a couple of months. He had a very profound response, tens of thousands of people of his National Guard and military deployed to the streets, wrapping people up. He built prisons. 85,000 plus people are now wrapped up in prison. So the point there,
5,000.
That's right. And it went from the most dangerous to the safest place in all the Americas, safer right now in El Salvador than in the United States. So what President Trump's, if I could give him counsel, he and his team, it would be work with the CIA. There's an element within the DHS that's very, very good, is which we can get into another time, but there's an element there, and our special forces guys in Texas and in Florida. You can put together targeting packages, and we can have a fair number of thousands, probably 5,000 to 8,000 cartel members at the top tier and middle tier. You kill those guys in a campaign of shock and awe. You don't arrest them. You don't try to detain them. You don't question them. You just kill them. There's going to be some collateral damage, I understand. You also destroy their infrastructure, whether that be they have cell phone towers, their labs, their homes, their factories. You take about a couple months and you just light up many chunks of Mexico, and you let Sheinbaum know, hey, we're gonna do it, or you don't, and you just do it. That kind of campaign is so vital and critical. You take out the cartels, and then you be prepared for the counterpunch, because they will. But hopefully, you can degrade them to such an extent that their counterpunch can be dealt with a bit more normal activities by the Mexican Navy, or the Mexican Navy is a pretty good service down there. So you can use more traditional means to then handle the cleanup operations, but you got to hit them hard and hit them fast. You got to do that critically, because if it's just a little pinprick here and there, you're going to make the problem worse. So that is what I would offer to President Trump as counsel.
That worries me, man, because so many of them are already here. I'm
Yep.
sure they're already poised to strike back, you know?
Yeah, they are. Sure. I will tell you about a special operations guy that I know that was Tucson, Arizona, inside of a Walgreens, and he was about to check out, and the guy in front of him was a cartel guy he was hunting down in Mexico. So my buddy's face went white, and he came back home, and I'm like, what's going on, buddy? You okay? And he's like, I just saw my target. The Mexican cartel guy that I'm trying to kill in Mexico is in Tucson, in a Walgreens. By the way, with his mom, and they were buying a prescription. So it wasn't that cute. So you're right. They are here. They are absolutely here, and that is the extent, and that's the nature of the problem. It's an issue. When I say Trump's got a problem, it's not just China. It's not just cartels in Mexico. It's not just crazy Scheinbaum. He's got a lot of issues. His team has got a bunch of issues. And this gets back to, by the way, one of your ad partners. You got to be prepared. We live in a really wild time. So however you need to prepare, whether it be food and water and medicines and all that stuff, it's not because you're crazy or you're a conspiracy theorist, but you need to be prepared, because as we crack down on this stuff, you are going to see in states or cities or regions, you're going to see pushback. And that is just the state that you are in when your federal government under Biden was a demented cadaver. You let the problem metastasize. Cleaning it up ain't going to be easy.
Man,
that's just the blunt truth.
God, Bryan, this is very serious times, my friend. Do you have any good news before I let you go?
Everything's awful. No, no, of course, yes. We do have good news, and I will tell you, there's a lot of very important and I think very good news on the medical front. I love talking about medical stuff on the podcast. I love talking about it with you.
I like hearing it. Yeah.
So I mentioned Tucson, Arizona. University of Arizona just came out with a really brilliant study involving Parkinson's. So one of the things that people will do when you're undergoing treatment for Parkinson's is a type of drug that changes the dopamine in the brain. But the longer that you're on that medication, the more that you start to have the shakes. You have different involuntary physical responses. They have found that low doses of ketamine can actually reverse that. Just one treatment can last many, many months. So that is a brilliant piece of news for folks out there who are struggling with Parkinson's, who have been treated with this. There's a potential treatment for the treatment, as it were. So I would encourage people to look at that news. I'll share it next week. I have yet to even share it with my own audience, so that's interesting and fun. Also, your neck of the woods, University of Pittsburgh, some folks there, researchers showing that red light therapy, a lot of people use it for their skin and other things, actually some healing properties with red light therapy. They've used that to implant red light therapy for people who've had severed spines. They're showing some connection to regrow some of those nerve cells. That's incredible. But in Pittsburgh, what they're showing is that it helps to decrease blood clotting. And it's in mice. And what they showed is that they exposed red light to mice with functional eyes and those without, blind mice. And the ones with eyesight benefited from being in a room with red light, in terms of this lower blood clot risk. So why is that? They don't know. They don't know the underlying mechanism, but it does work. So that's really promising and very hopeful news. So those are two pieces of news I'm going to be covering next week. A lot of other good medical news going on out there. But I will also say, fundamentally, we've got a different set of leadership in the White House coming in very, very soon. They have a very sober understanding of the world. We've talked about what's going on in places like Panama and Greenland. We talked about that last week. You and I did. I talked about it on my podcast. This president understands the threats. He uses impolite language, and that's true, but he's also getting results. Denmark now, in fact, just today announced more aid to Greenland to try to defend that island from the Russians and the Chinese. So we are seeing some good results on that already, and I think we're going to see more of that. But there is some great medical news out there, so I'm going to keep talking about it. It's always fun to talk about it with you.
Oh, we love it, man. Tell us where we can find you.
Well, in a hole, hiding because the world's awful and scary. Also, no later than about 5 a.m. Eastern time, you can find me the Wright Report. That's WRIGHT. All your favorite podcast platforms. And of course, I bloviate on all these things, but I do have sources. I do. It's wrightreport.substack.com. $6 a month. You'll download the daily transcripts. All the underlined words will actually take you to the hyperlinks with all of the sources. And that's a good and important way to make sure that you trust, but you verify even what I say, because you can't trust anybody fully anymore. You always got to challenge. That's important. Eternal vigilance. Eternal vigilance. You got to do it.
Well, go get that drink at Tequila, man. You know,
I'm on it. I'm on
I
it.
mean, geez.
What a world.
Go get a drink. What time is it out there? It's like what?